going to kick off today's webinar by first talking about my favorite topic, myself. I've been doing a lot of online training pre-COVID-19. So before the pandemic happened, I was doing a lot of webinars and online training, but that certainly increased since the pandemic started. And what's interesting as well is that a lot of teachers out there, a lot of fellow colleagues of mine out there are now finding themselves in situations where they have to very quickly learn to teach online and deal with the challenges that online teaching brings with it. So just a quick understanding from my audience here. Using the chat field, how many of you have never taught online before this pandemic and now you are teaching online? Just in the chat field very quickly, perhaps a quick word about how you are dealing with this situation. So yes, lots of people are saying me, never taught online before. And I guess you've kind of been in a sink or swim situation where you suddenly have to learn to teach online. Yes, it is harsh, absolutely, and quite challenging, as Beatrice is saying here. Exhausting indeed, absolutely. It's interesting to see how many of you relate to that. And of course, with teaching online, like teaching face-to-face, it presents with itself lots of challenges. And one of the challenges is definitely how we can motivate our students. In a face-to-face classroom, we have this issue, don't we? We have students tapping away at their mobile phones, and we're thinking, how can we engage them and get them away from those devices? Online, it becomes even more challenging because you can't confiscate their mobile phones when they're online. You've got to almost find ways, alternative ways of keeping them engaged, keeping them actually paying attention and participating actively in the tasks and the topics that you present in your classes. So today we're here to think about some ideas as to how we could get learners to the point where they feel that they want to participate, they feel that they want to engage with the lesson. And you no longer have to try and confiscate their mobile phones or shout at them just to get them to pay attention. Hopefully we'll get there. But before that, I just wanted to share with you one of my challenges. A lot of you are saying in the chat field at the moment that it's challenging teaching online. I suppose teaching is a challenging profession, isn't it? Because, you know, as a teacher, you're not just teaching English. You're dealing with behavioral issues, you're dealing with trying to be the care worker of this person too. And that's kind of why I wanted to share this little story I have with you that you see in front of you here. I have a student called Jana. And Jana was a very good student in a face-to-face situation. You know, she was always on time for lessons. She was one of the most active participants. She would put her hand up to answer questions. She would help her fellow classmates with problems that they're having with the tasks. But ever since we've gone online, Jana's behavior has kind of changed a bit. She's attending the lessons for sure. She's still coming on time, but she doesn't seem to engage with them in the same way that she did in a face-to-face situation. When I ask questions and I nominate Jana, what do you think? She gives me one-word answers like, yeah, interesting, don't know. And this can make it really difficult in pair work activities where I put them in breakout rooms to do pair work or group work, and Jana comes back with one-word answers, and this is very frustrating for her partner, as you can imagine. She no longer does her homework. She doesn't submit anything. And it's very clear, although I can't fully see, you know, Jana, I can just see her face, but I know she's multitasking. I know she's, you know, tapping on her phone or looking at other screens on a computer when she's supposed to be paying attention to the synchronous live lesson. And oh, I would really like your advice. I'm already doing this brilliantly. If you could use the chat field and give me some advice, because I'm not quite sure how to deal with Jana's behavior. And if you've had students or situations like this, maybe if you feel like you want to share it in the chat field, please feel free to do so as well. Winston, thank you. You're saying it depends on the student because they have different personalities. Absolutely. Yes. You see, in a face-to-face situation, I often have my ways of motivating students. And suddenly, you know, when you're, you know, in front of a keyboard, the whole game's kind of changed, hasn't it? Winston, what would you suggest I do to perhaps re-engage Jana? Because she was a really good student before this happened, before the pandemic happened. That's true, Eugenia. Students have good days and bad days, and we can't use just one instance to generalize. Absolutely. Mark Timothy, thank you. There might be problems that she's having that she's not talking about, so perhaps I need to talk to her one-on-one. Yeah. Letna, thank you. They don't want to have the camera on. Yeah, sometimes people are funny about cameras. They're happy to talk to you face-to-face, but they don't want the camera on. Karen, thank you very much. So looking for the reason, I think a lot of you are saying kind of similar things. We need to talk to her. Aurora, you're saying the same thing. Talk to her, connect with her personally, chat with her and find out what's going on, you know? It's not like she was a bad student before. Adelia, if I could talk to her face-to-face, you know, that would be brilliant. But I suppose what you mean by face-to-face is maybe get her on a Zoom call on her own, one-on-one perhaps, yeah? So that's kind of what I did. Because I think we all experience lockdown differently. You know, when I look at adverts for, you know, what's happening during the pandemic, you know, stay at home, hashtag, wear a mask, I often see photos like this one you see in front of you. You know, everyone's really happy. The mothers, like, you know, keeping their kids occupied with wonderful creative tasks. I don't know why they're wearing masks at home, but they are. My situation is really quite different. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've got 3 very young children, ranging from ages 2 to 7. And the lockdown was a bit more like this. I was trying to work because work hasn't come to a standstill. Work still continues. But my kids, my kids are kids. And they're not the most cooperative because they don't behave the same way with a teacher as they do with a parent. So they were just wild. And I was trying to do all the homework and the homeschooling that the school was setting us. At the same time, juggling my work, at the same time, you know, tag teaming with my husband. It was a nightmare. I don't know if you relate to this, but this was my lockdown experience. Everyone seems to have a different lockdown experience depending on their circumstances. This was mine, which made me feel like perhaps I needed to find out what Jana's lockdown experience was like. So like you suggested, guys, I did a one-to-one call with Jana, and I got her to tell me a little bit more about her experience of the lockdown. So it seems that Jana, because she was living in England, she doesn't come from England, so she wasn't able to get back to her family in Ukraine. She was kind of stuck here during the lockdown, which is a horrible situation. She lives with housemates, but she doesn't get along with them. So she spends a lot of her time during lockdown in her bedroom. She doesn't want to go into the living room or the kitchen to socialize with her housemates. So she stays in her room in pajamas for most of the day. She feels like everything is kind of pointless, especially because of this pandemic. You know, it's really exacerbating that feeling of pointlessness. What's the point of doing anything? What's the point of learning English, right? Are we ever going to use English? That's how she feels. And because she is staying in her bedroom all day, she's not socializing, she's not talking to anyone. She speaks to her parents occasionally on Zoom, but her parents are not very good with online communication, so she doesn't really talk to anyone. Yes, thank you, Ivy. suddenly it does make sense why she suddenly changed. You're absolutely right. It's easy to label students as bad students, good students. Oh, she's just not paying attention. Oh, look at her. She's on her mobile phone again. But perhaps if we took the moment to talk to the students one-on-one, we might, understand more deeply what is going on. Yes, Ika, absolutely. Empathy is needed. She needs to feel like we're in the same boat, or perhaps at least in the same ocean, because we're all in different circumstances. Like I said earlier, I've got 3 kids. I'm in a slightly different boat from Jana because I'm with my family, but we are in the same ocean despite being in different boats. And I think once we understand the reason why Jana is behaving in that way, just by talking, just by, like Sayede says, once you communicate with her, suddenly a lot is lifted. A lot of that pressure on Jana is lifted, and she now feels like she's able to talk about things and engage with the teacher, at least, again. Right. You've given me some really, really wonderful suggestions here. And, thank you so much for your active participation in this critical incident. Now, today we're here to talk about, what if situations. And I've kind of given you a what if situation by sharing my own experience with Jana, with you. I've given you a what if situation, and you've given me some wonderful advice of what you would do if you were me, if you were in my situation. And it's great to see that it's triggered so much active participation and so much engagement with all of you. Karl Rogers, who was the founder, who was the author of Client-Centered Therapy, and if you know this name, do write it in the chat box. You might have heard this name if you've heard of Community Language Learning, also known as CLL, where he puts students in a group, in a circle, and gets them to talk to each other with the teacher as the facilitator. He says learning is best facilitated in an environment that provides them with openness, a chance for self-disclosure. Although you were giving me advice in a what-if scenario, although you were trying to put yourself in my position, in doing so, many of you told all of us here about your opinions, and some of you even about your situations. So these what-if scenarios, they are giving you a chance to tell us more a bit about yourself. Of course, as we know, learning can only happen when there is acceptance. We talk about Krashen's hypothesis, input hypothesis, and he talks about the affective filter hypothesis. In order for learning to happen, students need to feel comfortable, confident, not anxious, not stressed. And in this way, they're feeling accepted for who they are. They also need to feel empathy. Empathy was a word that came up in the chat field a lot earlier. Adela, absolutely. I saw the word empathy typed in many times, and it's great to see that you're saying this. A teacher's job is also to have good empathy skills. Let's move on to talk about engagement and motivation. For that, I'm going to pass on to my co-presenter, Jair. Jair, take it away.
Thank you, Chia. And yes, absolutely. And this concept of engagement and motivation has a lot to do with what we were just discussing before with Karl Rogers' theory and community language learning. And so these 2 words have been used a lot in the chat. A lot of us, when analyzing the hypothetical situation that you presented before, we talked about engagement. Some of you mentioned the need for the student to be more engaged in the practice. And some of you also mentioned a lack of motivation in the whole situation. So I have a question for you. And my question is, can you have motivation without engagement? Or can you have engagement without motivation? Let's take a look at such question. It's on the slide. Let's and let's try to come up with some sort of an agreement on this concept. So Chia, if you could just click for the next animation. There you go. So can you have motivation without engagement, or engagement without motivation? A lot of you are saying no. They have to go together for good. Both are connected, but actually a student might be engaged in something, but not truly absorbed in it, because maybe he or she is feeling a sense of, it's not that I want to do it, but I have to do it, right? So you can then talk about engagement, because students actually doing his or her task. He's putting attention to the task, but there's no inner desire to fully learn from it, right? So he or she might be engaged, but not completely motivated. Because at the end, motivation, it's the why or the reason we act. And engagement is typically the what. So we're doing this and I'm working through these activities. If I'm fully engaged, I'm gonna finish it on time, and I'm gonna, ask my teacher to check it out for me, all that. But then the feeling of accomplishment, the true feeling of I've learned something, it might not be there in a very, very tangible form, because students were not fully motivated. However, engagement can also be an emotional commitment. When students engage in an activity, not only from the have to level, but actually from an emotional level, that's when they get to feel truly motivated to finish a task or to learn from it. So at the moment of selecting activities, presenting tasks to our students, we should always consider the things that motivate them to be engaged or disengaged. What is it that students have in their minds? What are their likes, their preferences that we need to cater for at the moment of selecting or presenting tasks and activities to our students that would actually not only engage them, but truly motivate them to work in the practice and learn from it, right? So can we go to the next slide, please? This concept of engagement and motivation, what you see as an effect, as a consequence of being not only engaged, but actually truly motivated, is this. It's a strong inclination or desire towards an activity that one likes or even loves and finds important, and in which one invests time and energy. So a way for us to verify and to make sure that students are truly engaged and motivated in a practice is on how much time they're willing to invest, how much energy they're willing to invest into a practice, right? Absolutely, not all students love learning English. Not all students enjoy learning English from screen, but when we do a careful selection of activities and we present them with tasks and challenges that would capture their attention and focus them into the learning practice, perhaps they're gonna discover that even though they were not crazy about learning English through a screen before, they can actually feel motivated, and they end up investing time and energy into the practice. And that's when magic happens, because that's when they're fully engaged and motivated. And you're combining intellectual intelligence with also an emotional sort of feeling. And that's, again, when magic happens. Absolutely. Thank you. And so, in order for us to fully understand and being able to spot out when students are truly engaged and motivated, let's consider these 4 areas. And the first one has to do with interest. How can we actually tell if students are truly engaged and motivated? When you see an enjoyment of a task, if you feel that the task students are performing is actually something that they would, depending on the age level, they would label as a cool practice. If you're teaching kids or teens, for example, they're gonna be engaged and motivated if they truly get to enjoy the task. And then when there is a flow in the practice. That is, your students can actually invest time, all of their thinking into the practice. They're not, if you're teaching young children, it's pretty typical when you're in the middle of an activity, if students are not engaged, they start saying things like, can I go out to drink water? Teacher, I need to go to the bathroom, and things like that. Let's say you're teaching younger kids, for example. And when they are feeling engaged and motivated, there is a flow when students are totally involved in the activity. And that, I think, is something that we all teachers aim to get from students, a total interest and a complete flow. Oh, you can see the slide now? Chia, can you share your screen again so we can get to see the slides? Very good, fantastic.
My apologies, my internet connection just dropped out. We're back.
Fantastic, very good. So that was the second box. We talked about interest, we talked about flow, but it's also attainment value. When students are capable of understanding, being aware that doing the activity fulfills core aspects of one's identity. When they're capable of relating to the activity, when they find the activity being meaningful, purposeful, relevant to their lives, when they're capable of getting language from that activity, they would clearly identify like, I can use this on any particular real life situation. The more meaningful, the more relevant, the more practical the activity gets, the bigger the possibilities for students to identify the value and enjoy learning from that activity. And finally, the mastery orientation. Students understand that they understand the importance of the language that's presented in the activity, and then so they focus not only on just finishing it, but rather learn from it, right? And so when they master the language, when they're not focused on pretty much memorizing grammatical structures or lexical sets, but rather mastering the use of language, that's when magic happens again. And that is a very, very clear evidence on students being fully engaged and motivated into the practice. So these four concepts, interest, flow, attainment value, and mastery orientation, are the key aspects that actually define and represent engagement and motivation in a classroom. Now, these are perhaps simpler to identify in a regular physical classroom, if you may. But what happens now when we're teaching through a screen? What I've learned from experience teaching my own students is that flipping some concepts and trying to turn the learning and teaching process upside down, if you may, works wonders, engaging and motivating students further. Traditionally, what we would do in a classroom is pretty much when we're facing students, we would concentrate on, providing them with input, lecturing them, if you may, or presenting them with language on a face-to-face sort of like spectrum, and then we would assign homework. These are the practice activities, even the production activities, like if it's a writing practice, you would do that at home and then just bring it back for me, the teacher, to check. So the inputs presented in the classroom, and then the practice, the homework, the assignments are done outside of the classroom, typically at home. Now, with this situation that we're all going through, that we have at some degree, we have to teach online, we have to teach at a distance, how about flipping such concept? And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept of the flipped classroom. How about presenting students with opportunities for them to get input, analyze the language on their own, perhaps through video tutorials, perhaps through online practice on grammar, vocabulary, the reading, the listening, so they can access the language on their own. Of course, guided with guidance from the teacher, but students doing it on their own, outside of the synchronous practice. And so when in class, when students are connected with you through, let's say, Zoom or Google Meet, you can invest all the time into, productive activities that would actually allow for students to practice and produce the language, activities that would trigger critical thinking, create creative thinking, and activities that would ask for students to collaborate together. The more you trigger critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration in synchronous practice, the bigger the opportunities for students to feel truly engaged and motivated to learn. And I think what we're going to talk about now, which has to do with presenting students with hypothetical situations, are a fantastic opportunity for flipping the concept and engage students in truly communicative, creative, critical thinking activities. And for that, Chia, on to you. And I think you're on mute.
Yep. Thank you.
There you go.
So we know from Vygotsky that collaboration is what, pushes learning forward, what helps our learners to develop, like what Jair was saying. We know from Michael Long and many others that it is interaction, it is using the language that is what gets our learners to learn how to use the language. Learners don't learn to use the language simply by learning structures, grammar structures, or lists of random vocabulary. They learn to use the language by simply using the language. So like Jair mentioned, perhaps the best thing for us to do, especially in an online situation, but not only in an online situation, is to leave the input for homework, to leave the input for something they can do on their own, and to use that very precious little time you have with them in class, whether the class be online or face-to-face. It's those precious few hours you've got them in that class. Do you want to spend that hour with them head down reading a text, watching a video for 30 minutes? Or do you want to spend that precious time getting them to, like Michael Long says, interact with their partners, with their groups, with their teachers, actually use that language and learn to communicate in it? Now, we saw earlier how useful hypothetical situations, like for you when you were imagining what you would do if you were me dealing with my student Jana, how these wonderful situations can be used to encourage engagement, to encourage active participation. Let's compare that, first of all, to more traditional classroom communicative activities. So we try to get spoken fluency, and we try to get communicative tasks in the classroom, and we assign them tasks like this one. Tell your partner about a problem you've been having at home. Any thoughts of what might go wrong with this task? If you could use the chat field. What could go wrong with a task like this? Tell your partner about a problem you've been having at home. Now, of course, you could always make that task work. If you've got a really good relationship with your class, if it's a small class, this could really, really work. But yes, Eugenia, students don't want to feel exposed. Perhaps it's too personal. Yes, Laurel, they might get emotional. Affective filter, yeah, they could have some big sensitive problems, and you sharing that might turn the class into a therapy session. Again, it depends on your students. If you've got a very close relationship with your class, if it's a small class with few students, and if they know each other very well, this question might work really well. But if you don't know your class too well, if you haven't set up the activity properly and you've just dived straight in to go, all right, today we're going to look at phrases to teach us how to give advice. Now, tell your partner about a problem you'd be having at home. That might be a little too insensitive, perhaps. Not everyone can open up, like Aurora says. Right, how about this one? What could go wrong with this one? Tell your partner what you're going to do this weekend. Now, this is a really common activity, isn't it? We've all done it before. Tell your partner what you did last weekend and tell your partner what you're going to do this weekend, especially if you're trying to practice certain future forms. Jessica, good point. The more students you have, I think the more important it is to make use of pair work and group work. If you have a large class, especially with younger learners, you can't depend on them paying attention to a 10-minute grammar presentation, can we? So in that case, we've got to make that task really engaging so that 45 students, especially if they're younger learners, will really participate and engage in it and be communicating with it. And the only way to do that with large classes is to just use lots of pair work. So if you're using Zoom, for example, and lots of platforms have this now, you can put them in breakout rooms and get them to do tasks, and you just kind of float around the different breakout rooms monitoring, and that's always a good way. That's a really nice task. Compare and contrast life before COVID and life after COVID. That's a really nice task. Thank you very much for sharing how your life has changed since lockdown. Absolutely. That's a much more personalized and specific task. And students can actually share without getting too personal. They could say, you know, life during lockdown was tough. They don't have to actually go into too much details, especially when they don't want to, if they don't want to. And they can choose to go into details if they want to. So that's a lovely task. Thank you very much. Describe your partner's appearance to the class. What could go wrong with this one? I'll have to admit this. In my very early days of teaching, I actually did this task. It was in a teacher's resource pack, and I, without thinking, carried this task out. Absolutely. Radima, that is what I did not realize, is they might say mean things. And you know what? They might not say mean things. They might not intend to say mean things. They might just say, my partner has a very round face, which is exactly what happened in my class. My partner has a very round face. Guess what the partner said? The partner said, no, I don't. I don't have a round face. Are you saying I'm fat? This could go quite wrong if people are describing their partners in ways their partners don't see themselves. So yes, there are other ways of using adjectives and practicing adjectives. This is not one of them. Tell your partner about a time when someone was rude to you. Now, this is actually an interesting task because you're personalizing it. You getting your students to remember a particular experience and, you know, communicate that experience and share that very personal experience. But exactly, Elizabeth, you took the words out of my mouth. It's hard to think on the spot, to suddenly put students on the spot and go, all right, here you go. Think of an experience where you blah, blah, blah. I don't know. If you teach IELTS exams, I often have that issue where you say, now you're going to give a 2-minute presentation about a photo that you love a lot. And students panic. I can't think of a photo I love a lot. Or tell your partner about an email you received that was important to you. I couldn't think of an email I received that was important to me. It's so hard to think on the spot with no guidelines, no examples, no model answers whatsoever. Hopefully later on, when I show you some critical incidents, I'll show you a way of helping students to, by giving them example stories that might trigger their own memories. So much so that they might come forward with, hey, I've got a story exactly like this one. Can I share it with the class? And that's how you get them to tell you a story about a time when someone was rude to them, by triggering that memory. So here is an example of a communicative activity that might work with your classes. So a good motivating communicative activity needs to be personalized. It needs to be interesting enough for them to want to engage in it. It needs to be without risk. So saying share your problems at home when you don't know the students very well can be risky and they might not open up. And if they don't open up, they shut down. Having said that, one of the advantages of online lessons is that students get to hide behind a keyboard. And strangely, sometimes that gives them the courage to open up even more than in a face-to-face situation. So if you are trying to motivate and engage students and get them to share online, remember that sometimes it's easier to share your emotions when you're hiding behind a keyboard. So do use that to your advantage.
Right.
Students need examples. Like I said earlier, they need examples, they need model stories. And those stories often trigger those memories of their own stories. So that by the end, by the last stage of your lesson, when you say, now share your own story with your partner, share your story about a time when someone was rude to you, they now have lots of ideas in their head because they've been seeing lots of stories, lots of examples from both the teacher and their fellow classmates. So here's an example of a story, a critical incident. Miyoko was queuing for a bus on her first morning in a new city. When the bus arrived, someone pushed past her to get in front. When Miyoko got onto the bus, she saw someone with his feet on the seat. Then another person sitting next to Miyoko blew her nose into a tissue. And then the person behind began talking loudly on his phone. Miyoko was surprised by the behavior she saw on the bus, so she told her friend that people in this city were very rude. Now, using the chat field, what exactly did Miyoko find rude? What was rude? What did she think was rude? What do you think was the issue here? Okay, Sayade, thank you. Perhaps she thought that people speaking loudly is rude, okay? People not respecting the cue, the line, yes. Interestingly, you know, bad manners, what is rude, what is not rude, what is polite, what is not polite, it's really subjective, isn't it? Because when Miyoko said this to her friend said, her friend who lives in that city, said to her, are they rude, really? Well, that's just what they do in this city. Sayede, spot on. It is all a cultural issue because what we think is rude might not be the same as what someone else from a different culture thinks is rude. Now, let me broaden the definition of culture. When we talk about culture, we often think about nationalities, don't we? Or regions of a country. But culture is so much more than that. Culture can be your age group, you know, the culture you share with your friends, of your peers of the same age group might be very different from the culture of your parents and their friends. It could be an industry thing. I'm sure teachers share a culture that information technology people don't share. Business people share a very different culture. So it could be industry specific, it could be department specific, it could be company specific, right? Your school might have a very different culture to my school. In my school, when it's your birthday, you've got to bring a cake. You might not have that culture, but in my school, that's what we do. If it's your birthday, you bring a cake. And when I first came to this school, I thought, what? It's my birthday. Why should I bring a cake? So culture can be so different depending on the community. Exactly, Sayede. You're becoming my favorite student, Sayede. All the right answers. Yes, it's exactly that. Culture is the community you belong to. And Miyoko belongs to a community, whether it be her nationality or the people she grew up with or the company she works for. She belongs to a community that finds this behavior rude. Blowing your nose, especially during a pandemic, blowing your nose, even into a tissue in front of someone. That's tricky, isn't it, on a crowded place like a bus? Thank you, Roderick. In Japan, blowing your nose into a tissue in public, pandemic or no pandemic, is an absolute no-no, horrendous. Do not do that in Japan. And Miyoko, judging from her name, is clearly Japanese, so she finds this shockingly rude. However, in some cultures, that might not be an issue. Talking loudly on the phone might be rude to her, but might not be rude to others. So here, we've got a slightly different situation here. Dorina and Erica are good friends. When Erica makes a mistake in English, Dorina corrects her. Now, you're going to get to tell me, according to the communities you belong to, do you think this is polite? Neither polite nor impolite, or impolite? Now you've got a poll right in front of you. Please click the answer you think is most appropriate? Dorina corrects Erica. Erica's English. Dorina is not a teacher. Dorina is Erica's good friend. So you see a poll in front of you. All you need to do is, don't use the chat field. Click onto the poll if you could. All right. And then click submit. You have a poll in front. You have to click submit. Okay, the results of the poll is in. Okay, interestingly, 59% of you, because you're English teachers, so you're very open-minded, you're very accommodating and flexible. I suspect that's why you all said neither polite nor impolite. And perhaps also because you're English teachers, you think it's okay. 27% of you say, yeah, totally polite. It's okay to correct. Of course, it could depend on the situation. If Dorina is correct, is how Dorina is correcting Erica and where she's correcting Erica. Yeah. Let's have a look at the next one. Fred asks Miller to go for dinner. At the end of the dinner, Fred says to Miller, can we split the bill? Can we pay half of the bill each? Is this polite? Neither polite nor impolite? Or impolite? Angelina, thank you. So in that sense, it's polite because, yes, she doesn't want Erica to make the mistake in public. She doesn't want Erica to be embarrassed, so she corrects her, and it's actually, you know, coming from a good place. It's with good intentions that she's correcting her English. Absolutely. And of course, it depends on how good a friend you are. So absolutely, that's true too. Let's have a look at this poll. Oh, okay. So we are not in agreement for this one. Very different answers. 37% say, yeah, neither polite nor impolite. Perhaps it depends on the situation. Beatrix, you're right. He might not have said it in the first place. So if he said it at the end of the meal, it might have surprised Miller. Yes, Anoa, depends on the relationship. I got into an argument with a student, maybe an argument is a strong word. I got into a discussion with a student once about this very topic. She was of the belief that if a man invites a woman out, whatever their relationship, he should be paying for the meal. And by invite, she means like if he says, you know, let's go for dinner, if he invites, he pays. I totally, you know, I don't come from that culture. I'm totally happy to split the bill. So yes, Patricia, totally cultural. The thing I love about these mini stories, these what I call critical incidents, these mini stories with a tinge of misunderstanding, a tinge of miscommunication happening, is that there are no right or wrong answers. And in order to answer polite or impolite, students need to get into a bit of a discussion. Just like you are doing right now in the chat field, students need to talk about why they feel that way. Why do they think it's polite? Why do they think it's not polite? Etiquette is etiquette. Erwin says etiquette. Is etiquette cultural? You know, what's polite etiquette in one place might not be polite etiquette in another. So let's move on to the next poll here. Nadia writes Amira an email. Amira doesn't reply for 2 days. Oh, in this age of people working from home, is 2 days too long? Is that polite? Neither polite nor impolite, or impolite? Your poll is in front of you. Do click away. And if you fancy, after you've clicked on the poll, use the chat field and tell us why you feel this way. Oh, thank you, Radima. So 2 days, what do you think? Oh, nice one, Beatrix. You're very understanding. She might be ill. Okay. Some people don't check their emails for days. Well, again, it's cultural, isn't it? Oh, 44%. So nearly half of you think that it is impolite. 2 days is too long. And more than half, slightly more than half, thinks it's neither polite nor impolite. Very interesting. And of course, Daniela is very understanding. She says she might not have a good internet connection. So again, there are no right or wrong answers, but it's really interesting to just get these topics out in the open and get students to say why they think so. And do you see how active the chat field is at the moment? Everyone has an opinion because everyone has a different opinion, and everyone wants to say, hey, I believe this because X, Y, and Z. No, I believe that because X, Y, and Z. And that's where that controversy happens. That's where that discussion, that debate happens, all because of a simple 2-line story about Nadia and Amira. Let's have another one, okay? Ivan sees 2 friends, Alan and Kara, talking. He goes over to them and asks them a question. They don't answer him and continue talking to each other. Oh, polite. Neither polite nor impolite. Impolite. So using, again, the poll in front of you. Eugenia, rude, 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 she says. Why, Eugenia? Why is it rude? What is rude about it? Could you tell us in the chat field? Oh, very interestingly, 85% of you say impolite. Now, let me say that interrupting and turn taking is so much a cultural thing, so much. In my book that Emily mentioned in the beginning, Successful International Communication, I talk about these 3 ways of turn taking. Rugby, like rugby, you know, you push each other away and you interrupt. Bowling, where you bowl and you wait, and then you bowl, and then you wait, and basketball. So these 3 turn-taking ideas can be so cultural, and I could spend an entire webinar talking about turn-taking, but I won't do that. I am going to tell you what we've been doing. So far, these little stories you've seen are called critical incidents. What are critical incidents? They are stories, a brief description of a situation, like what you've seen. Often these stories have some kind of conflict, misunderstanding, maybe a communication problem or some kind of problem. And by using these stories with students, like I've just used with you, I'm increasing your awareness of self and of others. I'm getting you to reflect on what you believe in and why. The main question here is why. Why do you believe those things? And how is that different from what other people believe in? There is no right or wrong here, but that awareness that people are different sometimes, and it's good to be accepting and adaptable. It allows us to see the world through different lenses. When you realize that in certain cultures, interrupting is seen as active participation, maybe we see that interrupting as a different, not as an impolite thing, but as a dynamic thing. Karl Rogers, whom we mentioned earlier, says, being empathetic is seeing the world through the eyes of the other and not seeing your world reflected in their eyes. And that's so true, isn't it? We don't want to be walking in someone else's shoes as ourselves. We want to put ourselves in their position completely and try and see it through their eyes. And critical incidents are a wonderful way of getting students to do that, to think critically, to exercise those, what shall I call them, life skills, or some people call them 21st century skills, some people call them employability skills, transferable skills, whatever you want to call them. These incidents, these critical incidents, these stories are fantastic for that. So why use critical incidents? Because unlike saying, now tell me a problem you have, you're showing students a problem that someone else has. So they get to experience that conflict without bringing their own conflict into the picture. These critical incidents often trigger very strong emotions, very strong opinions. And like you guys in the chat field, it makes you guys want to talk. It makes students want to engage with it. People like giving advice. When I said to you, if you were me, what would you do? People like to feel helpful and kind. People like to say, if I were John, I would do this. So why not give students the opportunity to do that? And of course, like I said earlier, it's a great vehicle for communication skills training. Now, I am going to move very quickly because of time. I'm going to hand over to Jair, and I'm going to move quickly to an example of a critical incident you can do that allows practicing of useful phrases and language. So Jair, take it away.
Thank you. So here's a critical incident with all the characteristics that Gia just presented seconds ago. Let's take a look at this critical incident. It says, Javier is getting ready to go out. Kara, his housemate, is in the next room, and she asks him, do you need to use the bathroom? And Javier replies, it's okay.
1 minute later, Javier goes to the bathroom and finds the door locked. Kara is in there. Javier gets really upset. He clearly said okay when she asked him. So what's wrong in the whole situation? What is the problem in here? What would you say was the actual problem? The word it's, very good. Thank you, Christian. Lack of understanding, lack of coherence, very good. Fantastic. And maybe Javier's not a native speaker, maybe Kara is, maybe both of them are not native speakers of English. So there is a misunderstanding, absolutely. Very good. Different perspectives on the way they're using language. There's a confusing answer. The use of the language was not clear. Very good. Now, from a language teaching perspective, this critical incident gives us a chance to teach language for clarification, perhaps. What is it that maybe Kara should have said in order to make sure that the answer Javier gave to her was actually understood by her correctly, if you know what I mean? She needed maybe to clarify, perhaps, and maybe using this set of language. Can we go to the next slide, Chia? Maybe using those useful phrases, such as, for example, let me check that I understood you correctly. Or, so I believe what you're saying is, or maybe perhaps, do you mean, which is far less formal and pretty much more useful. Do you mean I can use the bathroom now? Let me just repeat that back to you to make sure that we understand the same thing. So those useful phrases, those clarifying aspects, even paraphrasing what was said originally, it's very important, and it provides teachers with a lot of opportunities for, teaching those particularly useful expressions and phrases through the critical incident practice. So we can actually target specific items of language through exactly phrases to clarify the message. Absolutely. We can select specific items of language to teach and practice through critical incidents. Let me give you another example. Here's another critical incident. Raquel uses her smartphone all the time. She sends from 100 to 200 messages to her friends every day. Her Aunt Maria has a new smartphone and had started to use messaging for the first time. But Maria's messages are long and sound like letters. Raquel likes their chats, but thinks they take up a lot of her free time. Maria tells Raquel to stop using emojis and GIFs because she doesn't understand them and they're too much. Raquel feels upset. So WWYD, what does that mean? What does that stand for? WWYD. What would you do? Thank you. Fantastic. Absolutely. So what would you do? And not in the actual critical incident, but thinking like teachers, we're all teachers here. How can you use this particular incident to teach language? What sort of language would you address, language practice would you address by means of this critical incident? Purpose, very good, fantastic. What would be a good item of language to teach or practice further through this critical incident? Okay, present tense, fantastic, very good. Nonverbal communication, great. Feelings, suggestions, exactly, very good. Let's take a look at the next slide to get ideas. So I would use this specifically for developing writing tasks. So for example, I would tell my students, okay, now you're Maria, write a message to Raquel telling you how you feel. So the concept of feelings that you talked about before in the chat is included here. Absolutely. You're Raquel, write a message to Maria telling her how you feel, right? Very good. You're Raquel's best friend. Write a message to Raquel giving her some advice using advice words. You're Raquel, write a message to Maria changing the way you normally write. So perhaps you can give Raquel ideas on how to be less formal, how to be more concrete and concise, or vice versa. Maybe you're Maria, write a message to Raquel, changing the way you normally write. So those critical incidents are fantastic also for triggering not only spoken communication, not only speaking practices, but they're also great for triggering and promoting writing skills, writing abilities as well. On to you, Gia.
Thanks so much. That's wonderful. Critical incidents don't have to just be stories in words. They can be a picture. I show students this photo. I say, who are the people? And I'm sure you know who these people are. It's the US ex-president Obama and the emperor, the ex-emperor in Japan and his wife. What are they doing? Now, they are greeting, but what's interesting about their greeting? Oh, hang on a minute, they're shaking hands, but they're bowing at the same time. Is that normal? Is that common? And then what if I then tell my students, especially for older students, I say, do you know that this photo caused a lot of controversy? Let's get online. See what you can find about what the newspapers in America said about these photos. What about the other countries? What are the newspapers in the other countries saying about this photo? Because this photo caused quite a lot of controversy and discussion in the media. So I'll leave that for you to do. And if you're motivated and engaged enough after this webinar, you might autonomously get online and find this photo and find out what people are saying about this photo. This is another photo, another critical incident I often use. It goes down really well with my teenage learners. I show them this photo and I say, who are the people in this photo? Some of them know, some of them don't. This is also another ex-president of the United States, George Bush Jr., and he is with the King of Saudi Arabia. Yes, it is Bush, Beatrix. And what are they doing? They're holding hands. Yeah, some of you with the exclamation marks look shocked, and that's exactly how my teenage students, especially my European teenage students, react that way. They go, why are they holding hands? But they are two men. And then we get into a huge discussion about holding hands and cultures and why shouldn't two men be allowed to hold hands, etc., etc. And then we talk about the Arab culture, where it is very common, in fact, for Arab men to hold hands as a sign of respect and friendship. Then I might even extend that by giving them this very true story that happened to someone I know very well. Soon after I met Salim, I was going to the conference hall. He came with me, he held my hand, started walking. I didn't know what to do. So I let him hold my hand. What would you do? Now, I'm not going to do this poll because of time, but you could do this with your students. Get them to say, what would you do? And if you're worried that students might not engage immediately with discussions, give them a multiple choice poll like this, A, B, C, D. It's so safe, right? Students don't have to say too much. They just have to put A, B, C, D. And if they want to, like yourselves, they can continue the discussion in the chat rooms. So, critical incidents, why are they amazing? Because they allow us to consider real world issues, to reflect on our own views of the world, but remaining in the safety of the hypothetical. Critical incidents allow us to reflect on the way we communicate, become more aware, critical thinking and all that, become more aware of how other people see the world, become more aware of global issues. Practice in spoken and written fluency. Give us a purpose to communicate because we want to communicate, not because we're told, oh, we've got to write this so that our teacher can mark it. Have a clear context because the context is king in a critical incident. The starting point of a critical incident is the context. So useful language automatically have a context. And increase engagement and motivation, because with critical incidents, as you can see from the very active chat field, it gives people that motivation to really share their opinions, share the whys and the why nots behind those opinions. And with that, I thank you so much for participating. I'm sure Emily would be happy. I know we are bang on 2 o'clock to field any questions that might that haven't been answered, perhaps.
Yeah, it looks like, we are at time, as you mentioned, and I'm just looking at the chat of the question box, and a lot of these were answered throughout the session. And I think the follow-up blog post would be a good way to answer some of the rest of these too, and some of the great ones that came in the chat box, because I know you all were wonderful participants and everyone put really great questions and comments in. So we can do it there. But I just really want to give a big thank you to our two wonderful presenters today. As you can tell from the chat box and the polls, it was a super engaging session. I know I learned a lot about critical incidents. I hope you all did too and really enjoyed being on here. It was a great way to start my morning. I'm in the US and it's morning time for Jair and I, and afternoon for Chia. But a few just to wrap up notes here, we do have a second session. It's the same one, just at a different time to help reach as many time zones as we can. That will be later today at 4 p.m. Eastern time. If any of your colleagues missed this session, we'd love for them to sign up and join us for the second one. So be sure to send that on. We have recorded the session and we will be sending the recording along with the slides to everyone. We'll also be sending you a certificate signed by our two speakers for joining us. And you can expect that to get to your email in just about 5 business days. So just stay tuned for that. And just also a note here, we do always post our recordings and our slides on our webinar archive. I'm just going to put that into the chat box now. So be sure to check some of the other ones out there and register for another upcoming webinar. We'd love to have you back again. And we have a full schedule of webinars coming up to help support you in whatever classroom you're teaching in this fall, whether it's in person, online, or a blend of the two, because we know it's different all over the world right now. So thanks everyone again for being part of the community. We're really glad you could be here with us and spend an hour of your very busy day as teachers with us. And I'm going to direct everyone to a feedback survey now. So please let us know what you thought. All right. And thanks again, Gia and Jair.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
See you again later.
Right. See you later. Bye, everyone.